Welcome to Training Tuesdays. On this episode, we're going to dive into some technical stuff and talk about how to get your message heard as a small fish in a big pond.
Welcome to Thriving Launch with Louise Congdon and Kamala Chambers, the show for heart-centered entrepreneurs who want it all.
5 days a week, we bring you different segments to inspire you to live a life of freedom. We interview the leading experts in the field of business, health, and love. Be sure to check out Training Tuesdays, where we give you a clear action plan to grow your own business.
Do you have a product or service that you would like to sell online? Or maybe you've been thinking about it, but you're reserved to do it because you need a website, you need complicated systems, and you need to spend money? Well, I've created a completely free course that teaches you how to use Facebook in a purely organic way. This means no ads and no money are needed. You can use Facebook completely free. So head on over to thrivinglaunch.com. Opt into my Profit from Social Media course. I'm going to teach you the free methods to using Facebook to make money today. Today's guest is Brian Kurtz. He's been a serial direct marketer for over 35 years, been responsible to close to 2 billion pieces of direct mail. Guys, the reason why we've brought on Brian Kurtz is because the guy understands marketing, copywriting, pretty much unlike anyone that we've ever spoken to. And it's a real treat, a real honor to bring someone who is such a tactician and understands how to help you make more sales, how to utilize your messaging so people really engage and really respond. So today, we're honored and excited to bring to you one of the best, one of the giants, Brian Kurtz, onto Thriving Launch. All right, Thriving Launchers, we're here with Brian Kurtz, and the amazing thing about him is he understands how writing affects your market, how to write it so that people respond online, offline. He's done it all, and it's a real pleasure to have you here, Brian.
Pleasure to be here.
So, one of the first things I want to ask you is, why is it important for people to study the classics? We've got a lot of people right now coming out into the online space that they're amazing copywriters, amazing writers who really understand marketing, understand branding, understand how to get out there. But one of the things I've noticed when it comes to like the really good people, the people that are really doing amazing things online, all of them at some point say you have to read the classics if you want to understand what's relevant today. Read the classics. Why is that so important?
It's a really great question. I spent some time with one of the great online marketers. I think most of your audience have heard of Perry Marshall. And Perry and I did an interview not that long ago, and we got really deep on this subject of why it's important, not just classic books, but why it's important to dive in and really understand the original source of where things come from. It's sort of like, your kid comes up to you one day and says, where do babies come from, right? But knowing where the original source is will absolutely enable you to ask better questions, to be more involved with anything that's going to be what anybody would consider state of the art today. Perfect example that came up just recently was I was on another podcast talking about direct mail, because that's where I grew up. I grew up in the world of direct mail. That means I actually paid for postage. I actually paid for paper. I actually paid for physical product to send out in the mail, which a lot of people listening here are saying, wow, this guy is a dinosaur, isn't he? But I always say paying postage made me a better marketer, because what I had to think about before I put a piece in the mail because of what I was spending was way different than anybody today, including me, because I do a ton of online marketing today, before you hit send on an email. You think that hitting send on an email, since it's so cheap, I can do anything. And the fact is you can't. And if you understood classic marketing and classic direct mail, for example, that's just one example, you would understand that the care and concern that it takes for every single message that goes out, if you did that online, you wouldn't waste any circulation online. You wouldn't waste messaging online, and you would actually have much deeper relationship with your audience, as opposed to not knowing the one time you send out an email that's so off base that you thought couldn't do any harm because it was cheap to send, and how many unsubscribes you might get or how many people stop opening. And I've heard horror stories about stuff that hasn't been congruent. And then all of a sudden, if you didn't get a lot of unsubscribes, the open rate went way down. So the example I wanted to speak.
Yeah, Luis, you would start reading your emails and correcting your grammar if you had to pay for them all.
Well,
that's right.
This brings me to an interesting question, though. And I bring Ben Settle up a lot because he's the one guy who really brought me into the email world, and he's the guy that I really started off in regards to understanding copywriting, and absolutely adore Ben's work and what he's up to. And one of the things that Ben talks about is he says, if you're too worried about editing your email before you send it out, just start hitting send and start writing a daily email. And I mean, Ben is prolific. He's very consistent. There isn't a day that Ben seems to miss. Every day I get an email from him. And when I hear you talk about that, I totally go back to Ben and go, well, one of the things Ben told me is don't spend too much time editing and worrying about the messaging, and even the unsubscribers, don't worry too much about them. Your point is to send that email, tell a story, and make a pitch at the end. And that's kind of his formula. It's very simple. And when I hear someone like yourself who's, when you're sending out mail, it's expensive and you have to be very careful because you're spending postage, writing time, the paper that you physically send, and then actually sending that thing and getting it to a person's door. So there's a lot of expenses accrued in sending one person something out there in the mail compared to an email. I really don't spend very much to send out 1,000 or 3,000 emails in one day. Whereas if it was a piece of physical paper, it's thousands of dollars, or more that you'd have to spend to send out letters. So I'm curious, where do you and Ben differentiate then?
Yeah, that's a really because so Ben and I are not disagreeing as much as you might think. What Ben is, while he's teaching you to not sit on your hands, get it out there, keep interacting with your audience, develop the relationship. The one thing that Ben has learned to do, and he's way better at it than almost anybody, is that he's congruent. You expect to get an email from him every day. You expect it to be in the language that it's in. He's trained his audience to understand that language. But the reverse example that I'm talking about is when you have an audience, you're not going out to them that often, and then you start, for example, taking on an affiliate that is so incongruent with what you've been selling yourself, for example, and that's when your audience they stop trusting you. See, Ben has kept it consistent. It's about, look, these are like the 6 basic, if you read Cialdini, which is again one of the classics, everybody should read Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he's got the 6 basic principles of ethical influence. And every piece of copy needs to follow those 6 things. Or at least some of them to be, and one of them is consistency. So, the idea that, you're not going to be consistent with your audience and you're going to be sending them all kinds of random stuff that's not applicable to what they want, that's not what Ben is saying. He's saying, get off your butt, do something and keep getting it out there. I'm not disagreeing with that because that's who his audience is. It's just like, Frank Kern, who's one of my friends and one of the great online marketers, he would have a subject line, dude, whatever, and people expect that from him. If I did that, people wouldn't open my email and they'd say, who the hell is this person? And why is he doing an affiliate deal with Frank Kern or something like that? So I don't want to, get too specific on people and places, but that's why the idea of congruent marketing is so important. And the fact is that, some people, if you do daily, and the thing is, once Ben gets all the people to unsubscribe or get sick of him, that's great, because who's left are the people that will want to get his daily. The ones that are going to buy the most, but now he stays congruent and consistent with that audience. So that's where I don't differ with him, but that is the case. The other example I was going to give.
One thing I'd love to hear from you is, you've gone through so many different phases of marketing, and what is the most important or one of the most important timeless things that have worked for you that continue to work with marketing that you think is like your jewel, your gem?
It's probably that the list is the most important component of any marketing campaign. There's a rule of thumb in marketing. This is, again, why it's useful to at least read the classics, because I always say the great Picasso quote, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. That's really why you read the classics. It's not that you have to follow everything to the letter, but if you learn them, then when you know what rule you're breaking when you actually get a breakthrough. So there is a rule of thumb in marketing that says the success of a direct response marketing campaign in any medium depends 40% on the list, 40% on the offer, and 20% on the creative and the messaging. Now, that doesn't mean the creative is half as important as the list. What it's saying is that if you have the best piece of creative that you ever could, if Ben Settle writes the best email he ever wrote and writes it to the wrong audience, he's going to get 0 response, 0 open, 0 sales. If Ben writes an inferior email, one that is not the best that he's ever done, but it's to a list of people that love him or understand what he's talking about, and he makes an offer that's irresistible, he's going to make some money, even if the creative is not as good. And so the eternal rule of thumb here is that because that's the case, if you're not sure about, and I spent a lot of time in list segmentation and list selection when I did direct mail, because again, I couldn't waste postage and printing. So I had to make sure that every name that I rented or found in the marketplace to promote to, that I was going to get an acceptable response rate from. That's what direct marketing is all about. Measurable response with an acceptable return on investment. So the list work was the most important piece that I did. But then I made sure I spent a lot of time coming up with a great offer, and I only hired the best copywriters, because even though the copywriting by itself wasn't what's going to put it over the top, by getting world-class copy with an irresistible offer to the perfectly targeted list, now I've got everything cooking on all cylinders. And so the rule of thumb that I've been saying to people, in fact, I wrote a blog post that says when 41% is a majority, although I changed it to when 46.6% is a majority, because that's the amount of votes that Donald Trump got, but I wasn't getting political when I said it. But I thought it was a good number to use because it got people thinking I was going to be political, which I would never be. And I'm not even going to tell you who I voted for. But I basically then said 46.6% is list, 30 whatever percent, 33.4 is offer, and 20% creative. And by doing that, I kind of was trying to make my point that if you get the list selection right, why do people do affiliate deals? They're not really paying for the list, but they're finding the best list. You know, people always say that when they do an affiliate launch online, that, you know, probably if they got 100 affiliates, 5 of them are getting them 90% of them. It's not even 80-20. It's 5 or 10 affiliates are getting 90% of their revenue. Why is that? Best list. It's a great fit for the product to the offer. Now, it also happens that if it's a perfect fit and your affiliate partner writes killer copy to endorse your product, that's why they become a top 5 affiliate. So that rule of thumb has been around forever. And the little spin that I put on it is that I think a lot of online marketers don't pay enough attention to the creative because they already have some of this list stuff built in, especially with a really solid affiliate group. But if they really spent a little more time on great creative and messaging to even different segments of those lists, I mean, God forbid we should have different messaging to different segments of our lists. I did it in direct mail when it was super expensive to split creative to different list segments. Online, it is so easy to do. And that's what, like, my buddy Ryan Levesque teaches. He teaches, you know, doing surveys to your audience, putting the names into buckets, and you have 4 different buckets of different, and then you have 4 different avatars, and your messaging to each of those 4 people, even if the video in your launches are the same, you might want to have like a 5 or 10 minute buffer at the beginning of each of the videos to those 4 segments that appeal specifically to those segments. So now you're doing personalization, which is so easy to do online. I had a hard time doing that in direct mail and offline. I did it to a degree. There were many times I had more than one control package, more than one winning direct mail package to different segments of my lists. And I tell stories about this in my blogs often. But that rule of thumb of specific copy to specific list segments to personalize it, you could put that on steroids online. And so that's a lesson I learned in direct mail, that I could be way more efficient online. So frankly, you know, I'm a kid in a candy store to be able to do that kind of stuff online in a much bigger way, a much easier way. And that, you know, to me, if there's one thing, one principle, that would be the one. It's a great question. You know, and that's where my head went immediately.
That's a really fantastic answer, and I really you know, so many of us are go-getters. We want to go out there. We want to get stuff done. What's one thing you'd say go out today and do to apply some of this?
I think it's most people who are listening to this who are, you know, really good online marketers, they are focused first and foremost, I hope, on list building, on building their own list. So they're not going to be reliant on affiliates the rest of their lives. So the thing that I would highly recommend is developing your own content that you can give away as free content, so you can get people to opt in and create lists. To me, the biggest, one of my buddies, great marketer, probably known to some of your listeners, Rich Sheffrin, who I was just with last week in Florida, has this great thing where he talks about no one should even think about whether they're building a business until they're ready to buy media. Let me rephrase that. That unless you're in a position to be able to buy media and make it pay out, you're really not in business. You're just sort of borrowing a business. And what he means by that, and again, these are my own versions of his quote, what he means by that is that you know you've arrived if you could buy paid Facebook advertising, or you could buy display ads or Google AdWords, or you could buy direct mail and actually get sales and make it pay out at an acceptable rate, and not being reliant on things that are free, like just posting on Facebook, hoping to get traffic through, you know, by organic search only, and doing just affiliate deals. Now, affiliates is a great way to launch a business, but to live on other people's lists the rest of your life, I just think is a really bad thing to be thinking about. So that's like the one thing, and it's not one thing you do tomorrow and it happens like you snap your fingers and you have a list. But I think everything that you do should be focused on that. The other thing is that you really want to spend a lot of time making sure that you're thinking about specialty as opposed to commodity. Let's say you're in the nutritional supplement business and you're selling a fish oil. Well, anybody can sell a fish oil. So either you better come up with a unique selling proposition to sell that fish oil, or come up with another supplement that no one else has, that you can come up with a selling proposition that differentiates you. So always thinking about narrowing your niche as tight as possible, and then eventually going broader. So always like narrow to broad. So let's say you're in a niche called fitness and nutrition. Why don't you do fitness and nutrition for, you know, I'm making this up, fat lawyers? Or fitness and nutrition for
I think you just created a new market.
Say again?
I think you just created a new market.
Well, you know what? I only say it partially in jest, but not completely, because the story I often tell is the story of the guy that said, I'm going to do a product that's going to help men in their midlife crisis. And I'm like, well, what qualifies you to do that? And then he told me his hero's journey of how he almost committed suicide. He lost his job. He came out the other end bigger and better, you know, got divorced, became an alcoholic, came out the other side bigger and better, and now he wants to teach what he went through. And I said, okay, that's a pretty good story for your promotion, but why am I going to be interested? I said, what did you do before you had your nervous breakdown? And he happened to say he was a lawyer. So I said, why don't you start with lawyers in midlife crisis? And eventually you could be, you know, the next Tony Robbins maybe. But you got to start somewhere, and starting as tight a niche as possible that keys to their story and your story, so you can be relatable, is probably the most important thing I think any entrepreneur can do to start figuring out what business they're going to be in. Be able to tell a story that's not just unique. It needs to be unique, but it needs to be selling a specialty and not a commodity.
You really remind me of my first business coach who kept saying to me, you do not want to be Walmart. You are not trying to serve every single person in the market. Right. You want to serve one specific type of person. Kamala is also very good at this when we work with clients. When her and I first started working, she was coaching me. She was very specific and asking me, well, okay, you want to help people solve a problem, but tell me more about that person so that everything that you write goes to that one person. It's not just, I'm a weight loss coach for anybody who wants to lose weight, because if you Google weight loss, there's just billions upon billions of searches that come up, and very big companies paying for weight loss advertisements. But now if you type in weight loss for overweight lawyers or something like that, there's not a lot of people in that market. So it's a lot easier for you to be a big fish in a small pond, so you can dominate it, and then you can go to another pond, but you're a big fish because you've eaten a lot from a small pond. So you just go to a slightly bigger pond. It's very great stuff that you're talking about. And as I've heard you talking too, one of the things that really came up for me is you really are reminiscent for me. And I'm sure that Todd Brown would say he really got a lot of it from you. When we spent time with Todd Brown, he talked a lot about a unique selling mechanism. Have something that makes you unique. So don't be just the weight loss guy. One of the things we see in copywriting a lot is one little hack that, helped this guy become the best golfer in the world, and he's a one-legged golfer. That's John Carlton. That's
classic. That's classic text right there. Classic swipes.
And how do people dive in and figure out what their unique mechanism is? If we're a weight loss coach, or if you're a podcasting coach, this is something that we help people with is a lot. With podcasting, how do you get in and really figure out what your unique mechanism is? Because for a lot of people, they're thinking, well, I'm a health coach and I help people become healthy, or I help people overcome anxiety. But that's still really broad, and it doesn't have this kind of uniqueness that makes it go, whoa, that is... At PLF, for example, we were talking about product launch formula with Jeff Walker earlier. It's very clear Jeff Walker came up with the sideways sales letter with the videos and the seed launch, and it's very unique. When you see that, it's Jeff Walker. How do you come up with or dive in and figure out what your unique thing is?
Yeah, so it's really you need somebody to be asking you a lot of questions and challenging you, whether it's a coach, whether it's someone in business, someone who's been there. The best students of Jeff Walker talk all the time about their niches. Susan Garrett, who does dog training, she did dog agility training first before she did broader dog training. Will Hamilton, who's the Fuzzy Yellow Balls, who does tennis training online, started very narrow within tennis. He, I don't know if he did doubles before singles or whatever. So even within a niche, he did a niche within a niche. So that's a really good example of that. But having somebody asking you the questions is really important. One of the things, and one of the little hacks and one of the little tricks that I've used when I've coached people on this is the question that I ask them. They tell me, let me give you an example. So someone tells me they have a product that helps business people become more efficient, entrepreneurs become more efficient by outsourcing much more of their administrative work, whether it's to, foreign countries or to, virtual assistants or whatever, right? So they've got a system that does that. So I'm thinking to myself, well, where are we going to go fishing now? Using your fishing analogy, we're going to go fishing in the Atlantic Ocean, or we want to go fishing in a small pond? And so I said so the line of questioning that I gave her was, my next question was, this is a good one. It usually works. I said, you've obviously had some success with this product, helping people be more efficient. Who has written you the biggest checks using your system? Who has paid you the most money so far to do that? So I don't know, let's assume in this particular case, she wasn't a startup yet. She was a little further along. And let's say she's got 20 clients. It so happened that she had 2 that accounted for 80% of her business. All right. So we looked at those 2 and we started looking at the 2 that paid her the most amount of money, what they had in common, what characteristics. It just so happened that we were able to kind of put an umbrella over those two, that we could go find other people. They were kind of gurus and people in a little bit of personal development, a little bit of marketing. We were able to go find a lot of people. And now she can go prospect in a pool that looks like the two biggest check writers. And if she could get the two biggest check writers to write her testimonial of how great she is, going out to 17 more people that look like the two on a one-on-one level. I mean, this was not like a $39 product she was selling. She was selling consulting agreements that could be in the tens of thousands. So in this particular case, in a B2B environment, but I think all of this applies because your pool can always get smaller to be the bigger fish, using your analogy. But it's really about not just being the big fish in the small pond, it's being able to relate then your story to them. So if not only can they go into from a big pond called every entrepreneur who needs to outsource help, to gurus and thought leaders who are one man and one woman kind of shows who need to outsource, and the fact that I have case histories of people who are just like them who've had success with my system. The fact is, you and I both know that once you get them in, the system that they're going to use could have been used by a dentist. It could have been used by a lawyer. It could have been used by, another type of thought leader. It doesn't matter. You are able to now write copy and be able to talk to that audience in a way that made it sound like, not in a deceptive way, but it made it sound like that this system of efficiency in their business was only for their type of business. And once you dominate that niche, then it's time to go look at another one, because then more people are going to write you checks because there's going to be some word of mouth. I never want my marketing to ever be word of mouth and referral, but you're going to get word of mouth and referral. But if you're focused on a niche, by being focused so tightly like that, your next niche is going to come out of the referrals, and you're going to start figuring out that as you want to start going broader, you're going to go out slowly as opposed to go out, as you said, to be the small fish in the ocean. You're going to be a bigger fish in another small pond, but you go one at a time. You dominate. I think one of the quotes I always use is like, much better to dominate a niche than to dominate the world. The odds of you dominating the world are so slim. The odds of you dominating a niche are really, really high.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things too that is really relatable to this whole conversation is a lot of people look at a company like Walmart that has these giant warehouses and dominates in a certain space and is just huge. Pretty much, it seems like almost everybody in the world knows what Walmart is. But Walmart, when I was watching a video, Perry Belcher from Digital Marketer was talking about. Is that the right name, Brian? I always mix the names up with the.
Perry Belcher is Ryan Dice's
Okay,
partner.
perfect. So I don't like to confuse names, but
he's very
in a video, in a training video with Digital Marketer, Perry Belcher breaks down how Walmart grew and became the giant it is today. And one of the things that they talk about, and guys, for you listening right now, this is really important because I know that a lot of you want to have an online business and want to take a lot of your offline to online. So if you're going to do that, listening to Brian is incredibly important because you can go and look and who are my top clients? What is it about them that makes them the top clients? And what is it about me and what I'm offering that really synergistically connects so that then you can take that marketing and use it online and not just become this kind of health expert or whatever business that you're in, but you can really start dialing in what it is that you're offering and why these certain people are connecting with you so that you can be a bigger fish in a very, very big world, because online is just it's an infinite space, but if you make it smaller, then you can kind of control it more. But going back to Walmart started going to very small like counties and offering kind of a particular service that those little areas didn't offer. And then they started moving into slightly bigger and bigger counties, and they didn't open up in big cities until they had dominated the outskirts. So they dominate the outskirts of a big city, and by the time they move in, they're ready. They've got, they've become big on the outskirts. So when they've come in, they're just like a school of fish surrounding them, and they're well known, and people are more ready to accept that company. And that's how they grew. And Perry Belcher did a way better job than I did.
Right. Going back to your original question about why it's important not just to read the classics, but to understand this methodology, it's going to make you a lot more intelligent, and the ability to ask different types of questions. A quick example is I did a podcast not that long ago, got into a deep dive discussion about how we did modeling of names in direct mail. When I say modeling, it's called regression modeling. And it's how, and I'm not a statistician. I was an English major, so I had people do the statistics. But conceptually, what I was talking about, and this guy that was interviewing me wanted he started getting deep into the conversation with me, but without getting too deep here, the concept is what a regression model is when you do a mailing of some cross-section of a much bigger universe of names, you get the responses in, you actually lose money on that mailing. But because you got people to really respond to an offer, you can see what the characteristics are of those people who responded. And then you do a model of those names and how they look like in terms of all of their data, the names that are on the bigger list. So you have a 2 million name universe that you could mail to. You mail 50,000 names, you get 1,000 orders. You take those 1,000 orders, look at what they look like, and see what are the best names in the 2 million. And you rank them actually 1 to 2 million in groups of 5% or 10% segments. That's as far as I'll go on the statistical thing. But the point I want to make, I started talking about this. This is how we selected lists in direct mail. And so this guy who did the podcast with me posts the podcast on Facebook. And someone responded to the podcast after listening to it, very flattering. He said, "Oh, man, this interview with Brian Kurtz was great. And boy, he talked about this modeling where you could look at names that look like names. I thought Facebook invented lookalike models." And then he goes, mind blown. His mind was blown. And so my point here would be not that what we did back then was better, not that what we did back then supersedes what we're doing now. However, if you understand that methodology, my guess is when you get a consultant or an agency who's doing your Facebook advertising, or you could start asking questions about their lookalike models, how they're doing them. You would ask questions. If you understood regression modeling and understood direct mail list selection, or you understood how the greats of marketing looked at audiences and how they looked at list segmentation, the questions you will ask are going to be so much deeper. And with look, you may draw conclusions that are no different, and you'll still do the same Facebook lookalike model, but maybe not. And so that's only one example. And so by reading the greats, you gave a great example of looking at a John Carlton, the ad with the one-armed golfer or one-legged golfer. And then I have a swipe file of the greatest direct mail packages ever written that I refer to all the time. It gives me ideas for subject lines and emails. It gives me, I always say stealing is a felony and stealing smart is an art. And anybody in marketing today, in online marketing today, maybe this is another answer to Kamala's question about, advice I would give. It's like start really developing a swipe file of all your favorite emails that you get, all your favorite pieces in the mail, all your favorite copy that you read, all the favorite launches that you see and videos and video sales letters. Keep them, put them in a Dropbox, have a swipe file that you can go to all the time to inspire you to start thinking about, these are other ways you start thinking about how I can message deeply to an audience. That's how you're going to be able to differentiate yourself. Most people online today don't even know that there are available swipe files of ads written in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that are classic ads, classic lines. I know online marketers who do know that using a lot of that stuff, it actually can play very well in current environments.
A lot of human psychology really hasn't changed. All it's changed is that the mediums that we use is different, but human psychology hasn't really changed. Dating, the way that we date may have changed with the onset of the online and apps on the phones, but people are still interested, in how someone looks and what the appearance might be of that person and them together and how they're going to connect, and falling in love is still very important to people. And so it really hasn't, human psychology in the areas of love, nutrition, what desires, it really hasn't changed. And this is why the classics are so important. And this is why we were so excited to bring you on today, Brian. This is why we absolutely loved having someone like Todd Brown on the show as well, because both of you are really, for me, some of the kind of the top tacticians that I know of that really dive into this and repeatedly say to, and almost everything that they do, go back to these guys. These are the guys that you want to learn from. And it's all old school stuff. And the old school stuff is the stuff that the new marketers study to bring out quote unquote, like quote, new stuff. So it's like they're just taking the old stuff, rehashing it and making it new, but it's really essentially kind of a rehashing of the old. Before we sign off, Brian, I want to give you a chance to mention the name of your book, because I want people to know the name of the book. We'll have that on the website as well and a link for it. But I want you to be able to just mention your book, the title of it. And then the last question here for you is, just name off a couple people that you feel like people should go back and study if they want to be good at having a solid message and being able to entice people to give their email or to buy their product. Who are some of the people we should study?
So my book is called The Advertising Solution, and it profiles 6 of the greatest advertising men of all time. And I maintain that these 6 are all the six of many that I think everybody should read. The beauty of my book is that we distilled the greatest hits from these 6 guys. And the interesting thing about these 6 guys, even though they grew up before the internet for the most part, they practiced advertising before the internet. They were all, and they were more known for being more general advertising, not direct response. They actually were kind of, direct response marketers trapped within general advertisers' bodies, because they were really committed to measurable advertising and getting a return on investment. The 6 are David Ogilvy, one of the fathers of advertising, Claude Hopkins, who wrote the classic book Scientific Advertising, written in 1923. He died in 1937. Talk about human behavior not changing, right? The book is 100% relevant today. John Caples, who wrote Tested Advertising Methods, really the father of testing. They all wrote copy too, by the way. Robert Collier, who wrote the Robert Collier Letter Book, which was the classic book on writing sales letters. Gary Halbert, who was considered the godfather of copywriting. And Eugene Schwartz, who was one of my personal mentors, who wrote one of the classic books of all time called Breakthrough Advertising, which I'll be bringing back to life. So if people do get on my list, they'll hear about it when it's reprinted. And that book, as a matter of fact, I just wrote a new afterword for the book. And you'll like this, Luis, that I wrote. The first line of my afterword is, the book was written in 1966. The first line is, human behavior hasn't changed since 1966. Then again, you could put any year in there. And then I wrote 1066. And human behavior still hasn't changed either. So right. We're 100% congruent on that. Now, if people want to get this book, it's cheap. It's on Amazon for like $12. The beauty is that I created a bonus package for people that can give them a lot of free stuff for the $12 if they order from a special site. The site that I set up, it's called thelegendsbook.com, TheLegends book, BOOK.com, thelegendsbook.com.
And we'll make sure, I know a lot of you guys are listening on your phones, or you're in your car, or you're out and about doing something. So just remember, guys, anything that's mentioned here, we'll have links to all of it, including links to all the people that Brian has mentioned. We'll include links to those books as well. And we'll have a specific link for that website that you just mentioned there, Brian, too, because we want to make sure that anytime people, if you're listening today or tomorrow, or you want to come back and listen to this, and then you go, hey, I want to get that product or program, or who was that he mentioned? We have all of that on the website as well.
Nice.
You guys, this has been so fantastic. We've been here with Brian Kurtz. What a information-packed episode about timeless marketing. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Keep thriving.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there. You guys are going to definitely want to tune into the next episode with Dr. Jack Schaefer. This guy is amazing. He's a former FBI agent, and he talks about how our facial expressions and our body mechanics either attract people or repel them away, and how we can influence people just by changing a few things with our facial expressions and things like that. If you've enjoyed this episode today, be sure to subscribe on iTunes and rate us. Every time you guys do that, it helps. Thanks so much, everyone.